The autumn rain fell in silver sheets against Emma Shaw's apartment window, each drop an echo of her shrinking bank account. 29, buried in her father's medical debts, and now facing eviction from the only home she'd known since university. She stared at the final notice, her fingers trembling not from cold but from a bone-deep exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure. The garage she'd inherited was failing, just like her father's heart. As the last customer's headlights disappeared into the Montreal dusk, her phone lit up with an unknown number. She almost ignored it. Another debt collector, surely. But something made her answer. "Miss Shaw." The voice was cultured, old, with the faint remnants of a Scottish accent. "I represent Mr. Alexander Fraser. He wishes to discuss a proposition that could erase your financial concerns, permanently." Emma pulled her second-hand Corolla into the circular driveway of what could only be described as a mansion. Westmount's old money district had always been another world to her, one she glimpsed only when fixing the luxury vehicles of clients who'd somehow found their way to her father's garage in St. Henry. The house was stone-faced Victorian, its windows glowing warm against the deepening twilight. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, hair hastily pulled back, the only clean blouse she owned slightly wrinkled, dark circles under her eyes badly concealed. Her hands, despite scrubbing, still showed traces of engine grease beneath the nails. "You don't belong here," she whispered to herself. But her father's hospital bills and the mortgage notice burning a hole in her pocket said otherwise. The door opened before she could knock. A woman in her 60s, wearing what had to be a housekeeper's uniform, regarded Emma with barely disguised assessment. "Miss Shaw. Mr. Fraser is waiting in the library." The house smelled of beeswax, old books, and money, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Emma followed the housekeeper down a hallway lined with oil paintings, each step of her worn boots echoing against marble floors. The library door swung open to reveal a vast room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a fireplace large enough to stand in, and leather chairs that had aged into suppleness. In one sat Alexander Fraser, thinner than in the newspaper photos she'd googled, his once imposing frame now bent slightly with age, but his eyes sharp and clear beneath white brows. "Miss Shaw," he said, not rising. "Punctual. A quality I appreciate." "Mr. Fraser." She remained standing, hands clasped to hide their trembling. "Your assistant wasn't clear about why you wanted to see me." Directness. Another admirable trait. He gestured to the chair opposite his. "Please, sit." "Tea?" "No, thank you." She perched on the edge of the chair, too aware of the contrast between her second-hand clothes and the surroundings. "I have to pick up my father from dialysis in 2 hours." Something flickered in Fraser's eyes, recognition perhaps. "James Shaw. Brilliant mechanic. I remember his work from the 90s, before the accident. His innovations in fuel injection systems were remarkable." Emma couldn't hide her surprise. "You knew my father's work." "I know many things, Miss Shaw. Including your current financial situation. $413,000 in medical debt. Mortgage 3 months overdue. The garage operating at a loss for 8 consecutive quarters." The air left her lungs. "How do you? Information is merely a commodity, Miss Shaw. One I trade infrequently." He leaned forward, hands folded on the silver handle of his walking stick. "I have a proposition that would eliminate those concerns permanently." The way he said it, clinical, detached, sent a chill through her. "What kind of proposition?" "Marriage." The word hung in the air between them. Emma thought she'd misheard. Excuse me. A marriage of convenience. Legal, binding, but in name only. Fraser's expression remained impassive. I need a wife. You need financial salvation. A simple transaction. Emma felt lightheaded. Mr. Fraser, I'm 29. You're 72. Quite aware of the age difference, thank you. A thin smile crossed his lips. I assure you, my interest is not romantic. I require a legal spouse for reasons pertaining to my estate and business holdings. The board of Fraser Enterprises is questioning my competence due to my age. Having a young, intelligent wife would discourage certain maneuvers. Emma's mind raced. This couldn't be real. Why me? There must be thousands of women in Montreal who would leap at the chance to marry a rich old man. Precisely why they're unsuitable. He studied her face. You have no connections to my industry. No social aspirations. No family except your father. You're educated but isolated. Perfect for my purposes. Anger flared in her chest. So I'm conveniently desperate. You're pragmatic. Or you would be, if you considered my offer. Fraser reached for a folder on the side table. In exchange for marriage, I would pay all your father's medical debts, past and future. Secure the best specialists. Save your home and business. Establish a trust of $2 million in your name. The amount made her dizzy. It could change everything: her father's care, the crushing weight of debt. What would I have to do? The question came out before she could stop it. Live in my home. Accompany me to necessary social functions. Present, to the outside world, the image of a devoted wife. No more, no less. His voice softened, almost imperceptibly. Your private life would remain your own, within the bounds of discretion. Emma stared at the Persian carpet beneath her feet, tracing its intricate patterns. And how long would this arrangement last? Until my death. Which, actuarially speaking, should occur within the next 5 to 8 years. He spoke of his mortality with the same detachment as discussing the weather. Upon my death, you would receive 15% of my estate. Approximately $70 million. The clinical calculation of his remaining lifespan made her stomach turn. Yet she couldn't help the traitorous thought: 8 years of her life for financial security for her father, for herself. This can't be legal, she finally said. On the contrary. People marry for convenience every day, for citizenship, for tax benefits, for social status. We would simply be honest about our arrangement. He extended the folder. My terms, in writing. Have your lawyer review them. You have 48 hours to decide. Emma didn't take it. Why do I feel there's something you're not telling me? For the first time, Fraser's composure seemed to waver. We all have our reasons, Miss Shaw. Mine need not concern you. He set the folder on the table between them and rose with the aid of his cane. Morris will show you out. I look forward to your decision. As Emma drove away, the folder on the passenger seat seemed to pulse with possibility and danger. At a red light, she called her father's nurse to check on him, then pulled over and opened the folder with shaking hands. The legal language was dense, but the promises were clear: all debts cleared, her father's care guaranteed, financial security. What wasn't written was what she would lose. Her freedom. Her privacy. Her chance at real love. But as she glanced at her bank app, $237.14 remaining, what choice did she really have? The wedding took place on a Tuesday morning at City Hall, witnessed only by Emma's best friend Nadia and Fraser's stone-faced lawyer. No white dress, no flowers, just a gray suit Emma had found at a consignment shop and a platinum band that felt unnaturally heavy on her finger. The judge, a former classmate of Fraser's, barely raised an eyebrow at the May-December pairing. This was Westmount, after all, where money created its own reality. "You may kiss the bride," the judge announced. Fraser leaned forward and placed a dry kiss on Emma's cheek, his cologne smelling of cedar and something medicinal beneath. It was the first time he'd touched her. "Well done," he murmured, for her ears only. "The first performance of many." The word performance lingered as they rode in silence back to what was now supposedly her home. Emma stared out the window of the Bentley, watching Montreal's familiar streets transform from her working-class neighborhood to the manicured perfection of Westmount. Nadia had hugged her fiercely after the ceremony, whispering, "You can always come home to me if this gets weird." But what was weird when you just married a stranger old enough to be your grandfather? Morris, the driver who also served as Fraser's personal assistant, pulled through the iron gates of the estate. "Mrs. Fraser," he said, testing the title, "your things have been moved to your suite in the East Wing." "Your suite? Your wing?" The words felt like lines from a play she hadn't rehearsed. Inside, the housekeeper, Mrs. Campbell, Emma now knew, waited with a thin smile. "The household staff has been informed of your position," she said, leading Emma upstairs. "Mr. Fraser has arranged a suitable wardrobe. Your previous belongings are in storage." The East Wing suite was larger than Emma's entire apartment. A bedroom with a canopied bed, a sitting room with delicate antique furniture, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub that could fit 3 people. Everything was done in shades of blue and cream, elegant but impersonal, like an upscale hotel. "Mr. Fraser rarely enters this wing," Mrs. Campbell explained, opening a walk-in closet filled with clothes Emma would never have chosen: tailored suits, cocktail dresses, cashmere sweaters. "He values his privacy and expects you'll do the same. Meals are at 7, noon, and 6:30. He takes breakfast in his rooms but expects company at dinner." "And during the day?" Emma asked, running her fingers over a silk blouse that probably cost more than a month's rent at her old place. "Mr. Fraser works from his study until 3, then takes meetings downtown. You're free to use the library, garden, or pool. The West Wing is private. Mr. Fraser's rooms." Her expression made clear this rule was inviolable. "Any questions?" 1,000, but Emma only asked one: "When can I see my father?" "Morris will drive you whenever you wish, within reason. Mr. Fraser only asks that you inform him of your schedule." Mrs. Campbell paused at the door. "One more thing. The staff has been with Mr. Fraser for decades. Their loyalty is absolute." The warning was clear: she was the outsider here. The interloper. That evening, wearing a black dress she found in her new closet, exactly her size, which was unsettling, Emma made her way to the dining room. Fraser was already seated at the head of a table meant for 20, a crystal tumbler of amber liquid beside his plate. "Ah, Mrs. Fraser." He gestured to the place setting at the opposite end. "I trust your accommodations are satisfactory." "They're fine," she said, taking her seat as a silent server appeared with soup. "Though I'd prefer to keep some of my own clothes." "Of course. Make a list of what you want brought over." He studied her over his glasses. "You'll find I'm not unreasonable about such things. Your comfort matters, within the parameters we've established. The soup was delicious, but Emma could barely taste it. The enormity of what she'd done: married a virtual stranger, moved into his home, become legally bound to him, pressed down on her like a physical weight. "I'd like to visit my father tomorrow," she said, breaking the silence. "Certainly. Though you should know he's been moved to the private wing at Montreal General. The best neurologists in the country are now consulting on his case." Fraser spoke as if discussing a business acquisition rather than a man's life. "The bills have been paid in full, as agreed." Relief and resentment tangled in Emma's chest. "Thank you." Fraser nodded, acknowledging but not requiring her gratitude. "Tomorrow evening we have our first public appearance. The hospital charity gala. You'll find appropriate attire in your closet, along with a dossier on key attendees you should know." "A dossier?" "Background information. People will be curious about you, my previously unknown wife. We need to present a consistent narrative." He took a sip of his drink. "We met through your father's medical care. A whirlwind romance. My advancing age made us realize time was precious. Simple, plausible, difficult to disprove." The calculated manipulation made Emma's skin crawl. "And if someone asks me directly if I married you for money?" Something like respect flickered in Fraser's eyes. "Then look them directly in the eye and say, I married Alexander because he sees me as no one else does. It has the virtue of being neither confirmation nor denial." The days blurred together. Emma visited her father, who looked better than he had in months thanks to the new treatments. She didn't tell him the full truth about her marriage, only that she had come into some money and moved to Westmount. His skeptical look told her he suspected more, but his weakened condition prevented deeper questioning. At night, she slept alone in the cavernous blue bedroom, sometimes waking disoriented, reaching for the wall of her old apartment that was no longer there. The house was always quiet, the staff like ghosts who appeared and disappeared with precise timing. Fraser was equally elusive, present at dinner, polite but distant, revealing nothing of himself beyond surface courtesies. At public events, he played the devoted husband with a skill that unnerved her, his hand at the small of her back, his smile warm but never reaching his eyes. 3 weeks into this strange new life, Emma was exploring the library when she noticed a book misaligned on a high shelf. Standing on tiptoe, she pulled it down, not a book at all, but a hollowed-out hiding place containing a photograph. Fraser, decades younger but recognizable, with a beautiful dark-haired woman and a teenage boy. The family he'd never mentioned. That evening, as they sat through another silent dinner, Emma placed the photograph beside her plate. "Who are they?" she asked simply. Fraser froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. For a moment, naked grief transformed his face, aging him a decade in seconds. Then the mask slipped back into place. "That's private," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Not anymore." Emma held his gaze. "I'm your wife, remember. At least tell me their names." The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked 7 times before he answered. "Margaret. My wife. And David. Our son." Each name seemed physically painful to pronounce. "They died 26 years ago. A sailing accident off Nova Scotia. I wasn't with them. I was closing a business deal in Tokyo." The raw anguish in those last words cracked something in Emma's chest. "I'm sorry." Fraser's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his drink. "Return the photograph to where you found it. And understand this, Emma, there are rooms in this house, and rooms in my life, that remain locked for a reason. Later that night, as Emma replaced the photograph, she noticed a folded newspaper clipping behind it. The headline read, "Tragic accident claims lives of Fraser family, questions raised about vessel safety." Below was a quote from the sole survivor, a sailing instructor. "Mr. Shaw tried to warn them about the weather, but Mr. Fraser insisted they take the boat out." Shaw. Emma's heart stopped. Shaw was a common name, but still. She read further, scanning for details, finding only that the sailing instructor, J. Shaw, had suffered serious injuries trying to save the Fraser family. Her father had been a sailing instructor before he opened the garage. Before the accident that left him with a limp and recurring pain. He never talked about those days. Was it possible? Had her father and Fraser known each other before? Was that why Fraser had chosen her? A chill ran through her as she realized she might be part of something much larger and darker than a simple contract marriage. The grandfather clock struck midnight as Emma slipped out of her room, heart hammering against her ribs. The mansion's corridors were dark, illuminated only by security lights that cast long shadows across the patterned carpet. She knew Fraser took sleeping pills. She'd seen the prescription bottle in the bathroom they shared, which gave her perhaps 3 hours before he might wake. She needed answers, and Fraser's study was the only place likely to hold them. The West Wing was foreign territory, a mirror image of her own quarters but masculine in its dark woods and leather furnishings. Fraser's study door was locked, as expected, but Emma had prepared. During a carefully orchestrated conversation about art with Mrs. Campbell, she'd noticed where the housekeeper kept the spare keys. The brass key slid into the lock with a soft click. Emma held her breath, listening for any movement, then eased the door open. Fraser's study smelled of leather, pipe tobacco, and the faint metallic scent of old money. Moonlight filtered through the windows, illuminating a massive mahogany desk, walls of books, and photographs of Fraser with prime ministers and business magnates. Emma pulled out the small flashlight she'd hidden in her robe pocket, careful to keep the beam low. The desk drawers were locked, but the filing cabinet against the far wall opened when she tried it. Inside, hanging files were meticulously organized by year. Emma went back to 1997, the year of the accident. Nothing. 1996. Nothing. She was about to give up when she noticed a false bottom in the lowest drawer. Her fingers found the edge and lifted it, revealing a single folder labeled Shaw. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings about her father, his early career as a championship sailor, his work as an instructor for Montreal's elite. Photos of a younger James Shaw, straight-backed and confident before the accident that broke his body and spirit. Then came documents that made her blood run cold, investigation reports from the accident, witness statements, and a private investigator's findings that contradicted the official report. According to these papers, her father had not tried to save the Frasers as reported. He had been negligent, possibly intoxicated, ignoring weather warnings that any experienced sailor should have heeded. Most damning was a handwritten note from Fraser to his lawyer: "Shaw walks away with a settlement while my family lies at the bottom of the Atlantic. The legal system has failed me. I will find my own justice." Emma felt sick. This couldn't be true. Her father, the gentlest man she knew, who had raised her alone after her mother died, who had taught her that integrity mattered more than money, could not have been responsible for such a tragedy. But if Fraser blamed her father for his family's death, why marry her? Why help with his medical bills? The answer was in the next document, a psychiatric evaluation of Fraser from 5 years ago, when his board had first questioned his competency. The doctor noted, patient exhibits signs of prolonged complicated grief and obsessive tendencies focused on balancing scales of perceived injustice. Recommend continued therapy and medication. Balancing scales. The phrase sent ice through her veins. Finding what you're looking for. Emma gasped, dropping the file. Fraser stood in the doorway, leaning on his cane, his silk robe hanging loosely on his thin frame. Despite the late hour, he looked fully alert, his eyes sharp and clear. "You knew." Emma's voice shook. "You knew who I was from the beginning." "Of course." Fraser entered the room, closing the door behind him. He didn't bother turning on the lights. "Did you think it was coincidence? That of all the desperate young women in Montreal, I happened to choose James Shaw's daughter?" "Why?" The question came out as a whisper. "Why marry the daughter of the man you blame for killing your family?" Fraser moved to the window, gazing out at the moonlit garden. For a long moment, he was silent. "Your father took everything from me," he finally said, his voice hollow. "Not just Margaret and David, but my future. My hope. For 26 years, I've lived in this mausoleum, building wealth I have no one to leave it to. Watching your father build a life with you. So this is revenge." Emma stood, anger replacing fear. "You married me to hurt him. I married you because it was elegant." Fraser turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "The symmetry appealed to me. His daughter, legally bound to me. His future, your future, now tied to mine. The last piece of James Shaw that I could possess." The cold calculation in his voice made Emma step back. "You're sick." "Perhaps." He moved to his desk, switched on the lamp. In the sudden pool of light, he looked older, the lines of his face deeper. "But I'm also a man of my word. Your father will receive the best care. Your debts are paid. Our contract stands. And if I leave? Go to the police? Tell them you manipulated me into marriage under false pretenses." Fraser smiled thinly. "With what evidence? A grieving old man marrying a young woman who benefits financially is hardly criminal. I've built my empire on making situations look exactly as they should to the outside world." Emma's mind raced. He was right, she had no proof of malicious intent. She had signed the prenuptial agreement willingly. If she broke it, she would lose everything, including her father's medical care. "There's something else you should know," Fraser continued, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "The investigation reports I kept, they're not the full story." "What do you mean?" "Your father wasn't negligent. He wasn't drunk." Fraser sighed, suddenly looking exhausted. "I paid the investigators to alter their findings. I needed someone to blame." The admission hit Emma like a physical blow. "You destroyed his reputation, his career, for a lie. For survival." Fraser's hand tightened on his cane. "I was supposed to be on that boat. I chose a business deal instead. My last words to Margaret were in anger. Do you understand what that guilt does to a man?" Emma stared at him, seeing not the powerful tycoon but a broken old man who had spent half his life constructing an elaborate fortress of denial. "So all this, our marriage, the money, bringing me here, what is it really for?" Fraser's gaze met hers, and for the first time, the mask slipped entirely. What she saw wasn't hatred or calculation, but a desperate, aching loneliness. "Punishment," he said simply. "For both of us." The air between them seemed to vibrate with harsh truth. I want to see the real investigation reports, Emma said finally. All of them. I want to know exactly what happened to your family, and how my father was involved. Fraser studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Tomorrow. For now, go back to your room. Consider your position carefully, Emma. We're bound together now, whether we like it or not. As she turned to leave, he added softly, we each lost someone on that boat. Perhaps that's the real reason I chose you. No one else could possibly understand. Emma didn't sleep that night. She sat by her window, watching dawn break over the garden, feeling as though she'd stepped into a tragedy written decades before her birth. Her father, Fraser, the drowned wife and son, they were all caught in a web of grief and guilt that had now ensnared her too. There had to be a way out that didn't destroy what remained of her father's life. But finding it would mean digging deeper into the past than perhaps either of them could bear. The Royal Victoria Hospital's private wing seemed designed to disguise suffering with luxury. Plush carpets muffled the sound of medical equipment, and original artwork hung on walls painted in soothing tones. Emma found her father by the window of his suite, gazing out at Mount Royal with the absent expression that had become more common since his stroke 3 years ago. Hey, Dad. She kissed his cheek, noticing he'd been freshly shaved, his silver hair neatly combed. The private nurses Fraser had hired were certainly attentive. James Shaw turned to his daughter, his left side responding more slowly than his right. His eyes brightened. There she is. My mysterious millionaire. Emma forced a smile. How are you feeling today? Like a man whose daughter won't tell him the truth. Despite the slurring from his stroke, his voice carried the same gentle authority it always had. Morris brings me here in a Bentley. You're wearing clothes that cost more than our house. What's really going on, Em? She'd rehearsed half-truths on the drive over, but facing him, the words stuck in her throat. I made an arrangement that solved our financial problems. With Alexander Fraser. It wasn't a question. Emma stared at him, shock coursing through her veins. You know. Her father sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry decades of weariness. Morris mentioned his employer's name. I may have had a stroke, Emma, but my memory is intact. He reached for her hand with his good one. What did he tell you about me? About what happened? Not enough, she admitted, pulling her chair closer. Dad, did you know the Frasers before the accident? Were you really their sailing instructor? Pain flickered across his face, not physical pain, which Emma had learned to recognize, but something deeper. Yes. For 2 summers the first taught David. Fraser came occasionally. Margaret, she came every time. There was something in the way he said the woman's name that made Emma pause. You knew her well. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. We were friends. She was unhappy in her marriage. Fraser was obsessed with his company, rarely home. David was the center of her world. The newspaper said you tried to save them. Her father closed his eyes briefly. I did. I should have tried harder. Fraser has documents suggesting you were negligent. That you ignored weather warnings. His eyes snapped open, anger suddenly animating his features. That's a lie. I begged Margaret to postpone the trip. The storm was coming in faster than predicted. Fraser had promised David a sailing weekend for his birthday, and Margaret wouldn't disappoint the boy again. Then why would Fraser blame you? Her father looked away, back toward the mountain. Because the truth was too painful. That his constant absence drove Margaret to take risks. That she'd rather brave a storm than face his disappointment again. That David's last birthday would be another broken promise. Emma digested this, thinking of the psychiatric report in Fraser's file. The need to assign blame rather than accept a painful truth aligned with everything she'd seen of the man she'd married. "Dad, there's something else." She took a deep breath. "Fraser and we're married." The color drained from her father's face. "What?" The word was a whisper. "It was a business arrangement. He pays your medical bills, clears our debt, and She couldn't finish. "Oh, Emma." Her father's eyes filled with tears. "What has he done to you? What have I done to you? It's not like that. It's just legal. We don't." She stopped, unable to articulate the bizarre reality of her marriage. "I had no choice, Dad. We were going to lose everything." "No." His grip on her hand tightened. "Listen to me, Emma. There's something you need to know about Fraser. About what really happened after the accident." For the next hour, her father spoke more than he had in years, as if unleashing a story he'd kept bottled inside for decades. He told her about the initial investigation that had cleared him of wrongdoing. About Fraser's refusal to accept the findings. About the private investigators who had followed him, the witnesses who had been pressured to change their statements, the campaign to destroy his reputation that had left him unemployable in the sailing community. "He took everything from me," her father said, echoing Fraser's words about him from the night before. "But worst of all, he took my chance to properly grieve Margaret and David. They weren't just clients to me, Emma. They were." He stopped, struggling for words. "You loved her," Emma said softly, the pieces finally falling into place. "Margaret. That's why you never remarried after Mom died. You'd already lost the love of your life." Her father's silence was confirmation enough. "Did Fraser know about your feelings for his wife?" "I don't think so. Margaret and I never acted on our connection. We respected her marriage, her commitment to David." He sighed. "But if he knew, or even suspected, it would explain his obsession with destroying me." Emma's mind was racing, reassembling the past with this new information. Fraser's vendetta, her father's decline, her own unwitting role in a decades-old tragedy. It was almost too much to process. "There's more," her father said, his voice growing urgent. "Fraser hasn't just been collecting evidence against me all these years. He's been erasing evidence against himself." "What do you mean?" "The boat, the Marjorie, it shouldn't have gone down so quickly. Even in that storm. I always suspected there was a structural problem Fraser had been warned about but ignored. The investigation started looking into it, but suddenly the focus shifted entirely to me." "Do you have proof?" "Not anymore. But there was someone who might. The boatyard manager, Richard Pelletier. He tried to contact me after the accident, but then disappeared suddenly. Moved to the Maritimes, I think." Emma felt a chill. "Dad, do you think Fraser would have threatened him? Paid him off?" "Absolutely." Her father looked straight at her, his gaze clear and determined despite his weakened state. "Emma, you need to be careful. Fraser's not just a grieving man. He's someone who rewrites reality to protect himself. And now he has you, the final piece in his revenge." As she left the hospital, Emma's phone chimed with a text from Fraser, "Dinner at 7. We have guests. Wear the blue dress." The world seemed to have tilted on its axis, familiar landmark suddenly strange and threatening. The Bentley waited, Morris holding the door with an expressionless face. Did he know the truth about his employer? About her father? As they drove toward Westmount, Emma made a decision. If she was going to survive this, if she was going to protect her father and herself, she needed allies. And perhaps the only person who could truly help her was someone who had also suffered from Fraser's obsession with control. She leaned forward. Morris, take a detour please. I need to stop somewhere first. 30 minutes later, she stood outside a modest apartment building in Notre Dame de Grace, gathering her courage. The directory listed L. Fraser in apartment 3B. Emma pressed the buzzer, heart pounding. The voice that answered was young, female, wary. Yes. My name is Emma Shaw. I'm looking for Lily Fraser. I believe she's Alexander Fraser's granddaughter. A long pause. Then, how did you find me? I'm his wife. Another, longer silence. Then the buzzer sounded, unlocking the door. The young woman who opened apartment 3B was in her early 20s, thin to the point of frailty, with dark circles under eyes that were unmistakably Fraser's, the same piercing blue, the same watchful intelligence. So he finally did it, she said, looking Emma up and down. Found himself a young wife. Congratulations, I guess. Or condolences. I think I need both, Emma replied honestly. May I come in? I have questions only you can answer. Lily stepped aside, revealing an apartment that was a study in contradictions: expensive art on walls that needed paint, designer clothes tossed over second-hand furniture. The coffee table held textbooks from McGill's medical school alongside emptied prescription bottles. Grandfather didn't mention he had a granddaughter, Emma said, taking the seat Lily indicated. Of course he didn't. I'm the unwanted reminder of his dead son's rebellion. Lily's laugh was brittle. David Fraser fell in love with a working-class girl from Hochelaga. His father didn't approve. When my parents died, grandfather was legally my guardian, but he shipped me off to boarding schools. Now he pays my rent, my tuition, my existence as long as I stay out of his way and don't embarrass the Fraser name. The bitterness in her voice was raw, unhealed. Lily, I need your help. I think your grandfather married me as part of a vendetta against my father, a man he blames for your father's death. Lily's eyes widened slightly. Shaw. That's your name. The sailing instructor. Emma nodded. Grandfather mentioned him sometimes, when he'd been drinking. Said he was responsible for what happened. Lily twisted a silver ring on her finger, nervous energy barely contained. But then, grandfather blames everyone except himself. What do you mean? My mother told me things before she died. About that day. About the boat. Lily met Emma's gaze directly. Grandfather knew the Marjorie had problems. Dad had reported them, demanded repairs. But grandfather dismissed his concerns, said Dad was being overly cautious. Emma felt her pulse quicken. My father suspected as much, but couldn't prove it. I can. Lily rose and went to a bookshelf, pulling down a small wooden box. My mother kept my father's journals. His last entry was the day before the accident, documenting his fight with grandfather about the boat's condition. She handed Emma a leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with neat handwriting. The final entry was exactly as Lily had described David Fraser's frustrated account of his father dismissing safety concerns, insisting the birthday sailing trip would proceed as planned. This changes everything, Emma whispered. Fraser rewrote history, blamed my father, destroyed his life all to avoid his own guilt. That sounds like grandfather. Lily's voice was flat. The great Alexander Fraser can never be wrong, never be at fault. Everyone else must bend to his version of reality. Emma looked at the young woman before her. Fraser's blood, carrying the same wounds inflicted by his rigid self-protection. Something like recognition passed between them. Lily, I think we can help each other. Your grandfather has trapped us both, me in this marriage, you in this half-life of dependence. But together, with this evidence. What? We confront him. You think he'll just admit everything and let us go? Lily shook her head. You don't understand how dangerous he is when threatened. I'm beginning to. Emma thought of her father, of the decades of suffering Fraser had engineered. But I also know we can't keep living like this. There has to be a way out that doesn't destroy all of us. Lily studied her, suspicion gradually giving way to cautious hope. If we do this, if we confront him, we need to be prepared for anything. Grandfather didn't build his empire by surrendering easily. No, Emma agreed, feeling both terrified and strangely liberated. But neither did we survive this long by being weak. As she left Lily's apartment, a plan forming between them, Emma thought of her wedding vows. For better or worse, in sickness and in health. She had made those promises to a stranger who had orchestrated her entire life for revenge. Now it was time to rewrite the ending to the story, not Fraser's version, but her own. The Quebec countryside blurred outside the train window as Emma rehearsed what she would say to Fraser. Beside her, Lily sat with rigid posture, her father's journal clutched in white-knuckled hands. 3 days had passed since their first meeting, 3 days of careful planning, of gathering evidence, of steeling themselves for confrontation. Are you sure Morris didn't follow you? Lily asked for the third time. I took the metro, then a taxi, then doubled back before the station, Emma assured her. I've learned a few things about avoiding surveillance since moving into that house. Lily nodded, unconvinced. Grandfather has eyes everywhere. That's how he's always controlled everything, information. He knows people's secrets before they do. Not this time, Emma said with more confidence than she felt. He thinks I'm at the hospital with my father, and you're at your clinical rotation. We have until tonight. The small coastal town of Bay St. Paul appeared through a veil of light rain, its old buildings huddled against the St. Lawrence River. This was where Richard Pelletier, the boatyard manager who had serviced the Marjorie before its final voyage, had retreated after the accident. Finding him had been Lily's accomplishment, using medical school connections to trace his hospital records. The taxi dropped them at a weathered house on the outskirts of town. Smoke curled from the chimney despite the mild spring day. Emma knocked, anxiety tightening her chest. The man who opened the door was in his 70s, barrel-chested with a sailor's weathered face. His eyes narrowed with immediate suspicion. Monsieur Pelletier? Emma asked. My name is Emma Shaw. James Shaw is my father. Something flickered across his face, recognition, then alarm. I don't know any Shaw, he said, beginning to close the door. Please, Lily stepped forward. I'm David Fraser's daughter. We need to talk about the Marjorie. The door froze mid-swing. Pelletier stared at Lily, shock evident in his expression. You're David's girl? The baby? Yes. Lily met his gaze steadily. And I need to know the truth about what happened to my parents. Pelletier looked from Lily to Emma, conflict playing across his features. Finally, he stepped back. You'd better come in. Inside, the house was warm and cluttered with maritime memorabilia, models of ships, nautical charts, photographs of vessels. Pelletier moved stiffly to an old armchair, gesturing for them to sit on the sofa opposite. "I wondered if someone would come eventually," he said, his Quebecois accent thickening with emotion. "Though I didn't expect it would be you two." "Mr. Pelletier," Emma began gently, "my father always believed there was something wrong with the Marjorie, something that made the boat unsafe in that storm. Something Mr. Fraser knew about." The old man nodded slowly. "Your father was right. There was hull damage from an earlier grounding. David noticed it, insisted on repairs. Alexander overruled him, said it was minor, that the scheduled maintenance would happen after the birthday trip." "You documented this?" Emma asked. "Of course. Every inspection, every concern. It was my job." His eyes darkened. "After the accident, investigators requested my records. But before I could provide them, I received a visit from Alexander Fraser. He said if I wanted to keep my job, my reputation, my pension, I would misplace those records." "And did you?" Lily asked softly. Pelletier looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps seeing the ghost of her father in her features. "No, mademoiselle. I did not destroy them. But I did leave Montreal the next day. I believed my life might depend on it." "Do you still have these records?" Emma's heart was pounding. Pelletier rose slowly, walked to an old sea chest in the corner, and unlocked it with a key he wore around his neck. From inside, he removed a waterproof case. 30 years I've kept this. Waiting. Not sure for what." He handed it to Lily. "Perhaps for you." Inside were maintenance logs, inspection reports, and most damning of all, a letter from David Fraser to his father formally requesting the Marjorie be dry docked for repairs, citing specific structural concerns. Alexander's handwritten response was at the bottom: "Stop being dramatic. The boat is fine. Don't disappoint your son again." Emma felt a chill. The evidence was irrefutable. Alexander Fraser had known the boat was potentially unsafe. He had dismissed his own son's concerns. And when tragedy struck, he had systematically constructed a narrative that placed blame elsewhere on her father. "What will you do with this?" Pelletier asked. Emma and Lily exchanged glances. "We're going to confront him," Emma said. "Tonight." Pelletier's expression grew grave. "Be careful. Men like Fraser don't surrender power easily. When cornered, they become dangerous." On the train back to Montreal, rain lashed the windows, mirroring the storm brewing inside Emma. She had entered her marriage believing it was a simple transaction, her freedom for her father's security. Now she understood it was part of a decades-long obsession, a twisted need to control a narrative that threatened Fraser's carefully constructed self-image. "Are you afraid?" Lily asked quietly. Emma considered the question. "Yes. But not of him anymore. I'm afraid of what happens when someone has lived with a lie for so long that the truth might destroy them completely." "He deserves to be destroyed," Lily said, her voice hard. "Maybe. But what would that make us?" Emma watched raindrops race down the window. "There has to be a way to end this cycle without becoming part of it." They arrived at the mansion as evening fell, the grand house illuminated against darkening clouds. Morris opened the door, his expression revealing nothing. "Mrs. Fraser." "Miss Lily." "Mr. Fraser is in his study." Of course he was. Emma had texted that she was bringing a special guest for dinner, knowing curiosity would overcome Fraser's usual routine. She had not specified who. Emma led the way to the West Wing, Lily following, the document case clutched to her chest. Outside the study door, Emma paused, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Ready," she whispered. Lily nodded. "For 30 years. Emma knocked once, then opened the door without waiting for response. Fraser sat behind his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose, document in hand. He looked up, irritated at the interruption, then froze as he registered who stood before him. Lily. Her name came out as barely a whisper. "Hello, grandfather." Lily's voice was remarkably steady. "Surprised to see me in your home? I thought it was time I met your new wife properly." Fraser's gaze darted between them, calculation replacing shock. "I see you two have become acquainted." He removed his glasses, set them carefully on the desk. "To what do I owe this reunion?" Emma stepped forward. "We know the truth, Alexander. About the Marjorie. About what really happened that day. Do you?" His tone was dismissive, but Emma caught the slight tensing of his shoulders. "And what truth would that be?" Lily placed the document case on his desk, opened it, and withdrew David's letter with Fraser's damning response. Silently, she set it before him. The color drained from Fraser's face as he recognized his son's handwriting, his own careless reply. For a moment, he seemed to age decades before their eyes, the careful facade crumbling. "Where did you get this?" he finally asked. "Richard Pelletier kept everything," Emma explained. "All the records you tried to bury. The proof that the boat wasn't seaworthy. That David knew it. That you dismissed his concerns." Fraser's hand trembled slightly as he touched the paper. "This proves nothing except that my son was overly cautious. The official investigation was manipulated by you," Lily cut in. "You paid people to lie. You threatened others into silence. You created a false narrative blaming Emma's father because you couldn't face your own responsibility." Fraser rose suddenly, anger replacing shock. "You know nothing about responsibility. Either of you. I built an empire while carrying the weight of their deaths every day. Who are you to judge me?" "I'm your granddaughter," Lily said, her voice breaking slightly. "The one you've kept at arm's length because I remind you of what you lost. What you helped cause. And I'm the woman you married to punish a man who tried to save your family," Emma added. "We're the collateral damage of your inability to face the truth." Fraser moved to the window, his back to them, shoulders rigid. The silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice subdued. "Money. Control of the company. My public humiliation. We want the truth acknowledged," Emma said simply. "No more lies. No more manipulation." "And then what?" Fraser turned to face them, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. "You destroy everything I built. Drag the Fraser name through the courts." "No," Lily said, surprising both Fraser and Emma. "We want to end this cycle. All of us, you, Emma, her father, me, we've been trapped in this tragedy for too long." Emma stepped closer to Fraser, close enough to see the web of fine lines around his eyes, the sorrow etched permanently into his features. "Alexander, you've spent 30 years punishing my father and yourself. Isn't that enough? Something cracked in Fraser's composure, a hairline fracture in the dam that had held back 3 decades of grief and guilt. "I was supposed to be on that boat," he whispered, the words seeming to tear from him. "I promised David. Then a merger opportunity came up too important to miss, I told myself." Margaret was furious. "Said I was breaking David's heart again." His voice faltered. "My last words to her were in anger. I told her to take the damn boat herself if it was so important." The raw anguish in his confession hung in the air between them. "So when they died," Emma said gently, "it wasn't just grief you felt. It was guilt." Fraser nodded, a barely perceptible movement. "Unbearable guilt." And then the initial investigation started asking questions about the boat's condition. Questions I dismissed when David raised them. "I couldn't," he stopped, struggling for composure. "I couldn't bear for the world to know that my arrogance, my neglect had contributed to their deaths." "So you created another narrative," Lily concluded. "One where someone else was to blame." "Your father was convenient," Fraser admitted to Emma. "An outsider. Someone I could focus all my rage and guilt upon." He sank back into his chair, energy seeming to drain from him. "Over time, I almost believed it myself." "And marrying me? Was that just another act of revenge?" Fraser wouldn't meet her eyes. "Initially, perhaps. The symmetry appealed to me, binding James Shaw's daughter to me legally, taking control of the last thing he loved." He paused. "But it was also loneliness. 30 years in this mausoleum, surrounded by wealth that means nothing without family to share it." The honesty, however belated, shifted something in the atmosphere of the room. Not forgiveness, that would take far more than one moment of truth, but perhaps the first step toward understanding. Emma looked at Lily, seeing her own complex emotions reflected there: anger, pity, the weight of inherited pain. "Where do we go from here?" Emma asked quietly, the question directed at both Fraser and Lily. Fraser reached for the letter his son had written, traced the signature with a trembling finger. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've lived so long with this version of the past, I'm not sure who I am without it." "Then perhaps," Lily said, her voice softening slightly, "it's time we all found out." As thunder rumbled outside, the three of them sat in Fraser's study, bound not by legal documents or revenge or guilt, but by the fragile, painful beginning of truth. The storm that had started 30 years ago on the Atlantic was perhaps, finally, beginning to clear. 6 months later, Emma stood at the bow of the sailboat, wind whipping her hair as the vessel cut through the waters of the St. Lawrence. Behind her, her father adjusted the mainsail with practiced hands, his movements fluid despite his lingering weakness. The physical therapy Fraser had paid for had restored much of his mobility, though he would never be as strong as before. "Perfect day for sailing," James called over the sound of water and wind. "No storms on the horizon." Emma smiled at the deliberate choice of words. The storm that had engulfed their lives for decades was indeed passing, though not without leaving its mark on all of them. After the confrontation in Fraser's study, changes had come swiftly. Fraser had torn up the punitive clauses in their prenuptial agreement, freeing Emma from financial obligation while maintaining her father's medical care. He had formally recognized Lily as his heir, bringing her into the company as director of the newly established Fraser Foundation, dedicated to maritime safety and medical research. The most difficult change had been Fraser's public acknowledgement of his role in the tragedy. Not through press releases or court documents, but in a private ceremony at the spot where the Marjorie had gone down. Fraser, Emma, Lily, and James had sailed there together for wounded people connected by loss and deception, now attempting something more complicated than revenge or forgiveness, truth. Fraser had cast white roses into the water, speaking his wife and son's names aloud for perhaps the first time in years without anger clouding his grief. James had stood beside him, these two old men united in their love for the same woman, the same boy, the same memories now finally unobscured by blame. Ready to head back, her father asked, interrupting her thoughts. Emma nodded. They had sailed far enough for one day. As they turned toward shore, she spotted the familiar figure on the dock. Fraser, leaning on his cane, watching their approach. Though they no longer lived as husband and wife, she remained in the east wing of the mansion while managing her father's now thriving garage. Their relationship had evolved into something unclassifiable, not quite family, not quite friends, but bound by a shared journey toward healing. They moored the boat, her father expertly securing the lines while Emma hopped onto the dock. "Good sail?" Fraser asked, his eyes on James rather than her. "Perfect conditions," her father replied, the tension that had once existed between them softened to something like cautious respect. "She handles beautifully." The she was the Emma Margaret, a new sailing yacht Fraser had commissioned after renouncing his decades-long refusal to go near the water. Named for both Emma and his late wife, it represented his halting attempts at reconciliation with the past, with himself, with the people his grief had damaged. "Lily called," Fraser said as they walked back toward the house. "The Foundation's first maritime safety initiative launches next week. She'd like you both there." "Wouldn't miss it," Emma said. Lily had become the surprise bridge between all of them, her medical training and fierce intelligence channeled into preventing accidents like the one that had shaped all their lives. In the gardens behind the mansion, Mrs. Campbell had set lunch on the terrace. The staff, once so formal and distant with Emma, had gradually accepted her evolving role in the household. Not the young trophy wife they had initially suspected, nor the schemer they might have feared, but something more complex, a catalyst for their employer's belated redemption. As they ate, conversation flowed more easily than anyone might have predicted 6 months earlier. James spoke of the garage's expansion, his plans to train young mechanics from underprivileged backgrounds. Fraser discussed the company's new direction under the board he and Lily had restructured. Emma shared updates on her return to engineering studies, a dream deferred by poverty and now reclaimed. Watching these two old men, one who had raised her, one who had married her, both who had shaped her life in profound ways, Emma felt a strange peace settling over her. Not the absence of pain, but its transformation into something that could be carried without being crushed by it. Later, as dusk fell, Emma found Fraser in the library, looking at the photograph of Margaret and David that had once been hidden behind books. "May I?" she asked, indicating the chair opposite his. He nodded, setting the photograph on the table between them. "I've been thinking about our legal status," she said carefully. "Our marriage." Fraser's eyebrows rose slightly. "What about it?" "I think it's time we ended it officially." She met his gaze steadily. "Not out of anger or blame, but because we both deserve authentic futures." Fraser was silent for a long moment. "And your father's care? Your education?" "Those arrangements can continue without legal ties," Emma said. "Unless, you'd rather they didn't." "No," he said quickly. "That's not what I meant." He looked down at his hands, spotted with age. "I suppose I've grown accustomed to your presence here. The house was less empty with you in it." The admission touched her unexpectedly. "I'm not disappearing, Alexander. None of us are. But this marriage was founded on deception and revenge. Whatever relationships we build now should be based on choice, not obligation. Fraser nodded slowly. You're right, of course. He reached for the photograph again, studied it. David would have liked you, I think. He valued honesty above all else, something I forgot somewhere along the way. It's never too late to remember, Emma said gently. Isn't it? Fraser's smile held more sorrow than joy. At 72, with most of my life spent in the service of a lie. You're still here, Emma reminded him. Still capable of change. That counts for something. Fraser considered this, then asked, what will you do? After the divorce. Finish my degree. Continue working with Lily on the foundation. Visit my father at the house he's finally able to make accessible. She smiled slightly. Build a life that's mine, not defined by debts or deals. And will that life include visiting an old man occasionally? Perhaps sailing with him when his granddaughter is too busy saving the world. The vulnerability in the question made Emma see, for perhaps the first time, the human being beneath the wealthy, controlling businessman she had married. A flawed, lonely man who had spent decades constructing a fortress against pain, only to find himself imprisoned within it. Yes, she said simply. I think it will. 2 weeks later, Emma stood in the courthouse where she had become Mrs. Fraser, now signing papers to dissolve that identity. The same judge presided, eyebrows raised at the speed of the dissolution but asking no questions when confronted with their mutual agreement. Fraser had been more than fair, insisting Emma take a settlement that would secure her future while maintaining all promises regarding her father's care. The terms were reviewed by lawyers, signed without argument, the legal chapter of their strange connection closed with the stroke of a pen. Outside, autumn sunlight bathed the courthouse steps in golden light. Fraser hesitated, then extended his hand formally. Thank you, he said, the words clearly difficult for him. Emma took his hand, but then, following an instinct she couldn't quite name, leaned in and kissed his cheek gently. We're going to be okay, Alexander. All of us. His eyes, when she pulled back, held a sheen of moisture, quickly blinked away. He cleared his throat. Yes, well. Morris will take you wherever you wish to go. Actually, I thought I'd walk for a while, Emma said. It's a beautiful day. Fraser nodded, understanding her need for solitude, for time to process the end of this chapter. Until Sunday dinner, then. Until Sunday, she confirmed, their new tradition acknowledged. Emma watched him walk to his waiting car, back straight despite his cane, dignity intact despite the humbling journey of recent months. Then she turned and began walking toward the river, breathing deeply of air that somehow felt fresher, clearer. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lily, Is it done? Yes, Emma typed back. Free and clear. A moment later, still coming to foundation meeting tomorrow. Wouldn't miss it? Your grandfather will be there too. I know. Dad would be proud, I think. Emma smiled at the screen, at this unexpected friendship born from shared pain. Yes, she wrote. I think he would. She put her phone away and continued walking, each step carrying her further from the person she had been when she first entered Fraser's mansion, desperate, trapped, willing to sacrifice her future to secure basic survival. That young woman seemed distant now, though Emma carried her still, honored the strength it had taken to endure. At the riverside park, she sat on a bench facing the water. In the distance, sailboats carved white paths across the blue expanse, their journeys temporary, reversible, unlike the courses human lives charted through time. A year ago, Emma had believed her life was ending, crushed by debt, by her father's illness, by circumstances beyond her control. Instead, she had discovered a truth both terrible and liberating, that even the most seemingly permanent conditions could change. That secrets could be uncovered, lies unraveled, new beginnings found in the wreckage of the past. Fraser had taught her this unwittingly. So had her father. And Lily. And Margaret and David, present only in photographs yet central to the story that had shaped them all. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Emma rose from the bench and began the long walk home, not to the mansion that had been her gilded cage, but to the small apartment she had rented above her father's garage. Tomorrow would bring foundation meetings, university classes, dinner with Lily, sailing with her father. And Sunday would bring dinner with Fraser, not her husband, not her enemy, but a complicated, wounded human being trying, as they all were, to chart a course towards something like redemption. The water glinted gold in the fading light, a path forward unfolding with each step she took. The story of Emma, Fraser, and the tangled web of grief and deception that bound them teaches us that truth, however painful, is the only foundation upon which healing can truly begin. For 30 years, Alexander Fraser had constructed an elaborate fortress of blame and denial, believing it would protect him from the unbearable reality of his own role in his family's tragedy. Instead, it became a prison that contained not just him, but everyone his life touched: his granddaughter, Emma's father, and finally Emma herself. We learn that vengeance, no matter how meticulously planned or seemingly justified, ultimately consumes the one who pursues it. Fraser sacrificed decades to his quest for justice, only to discover that what he truly needed was the courage to face his own guilt, his own humanity. From Emma, we witness the courage it takes to confront uncomfortable truths, not for revenge or advantage, but for liberation. Her journey reminds us that sometimes we must walk directly into our fears to find freedom on the other side. Perhaps most powerfully, this story shows us that redemption rarely comes in grand, dramatic moments, but in the small, consistent choices to choose truth over comfort, connection over isolation, and forward movement over the seductive pull of the past. The damaged relationships between Fraser, Emma, James, and Lily gradually transformed through painful honesty and tentative forgiveness remind us that while we cannot change what has happened, we always retain the power to change what happens next. Even after decades of estrangement and pain, new beginnings remain possible for those brave enough to reach for them. If this story of grief, deception, and hard-won redemption resonated with you, take a moment to consider what truths in your own life might be waiting for acknowledgement. What relationships might be transformed if you found the courage to face difficult realities? What freedom might be waiting on the other side of that honesty? Life rarely offers us narratives as clear-cut as heroes and villains. Instead, we navigate the complex terrain of human beings doing their best with the wounds they carry. Perhaps somewhere in your life is a relationship that needs the kind of brave truthfulness Emma, Fraser, Lily, and James eventually found. If you found value in their journey, please share this video with someone wrestling with old pain or unresolved relationships. Your share might be the catalyst for someone else's healing. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the depths of human experience, the grief that shapes us, the lies that bind us, and the courage that ultimately frees us. Hit the notification bell to join us each week as we navigate the complexities of what it means to be flawed, resilient human beings. Until next time, remember that it's never too late to begin again, to tell the truth, to choose a different ending to your story. The past may shape us, but it is never too late to shape what comes next.